Welcome to episode number 3 of Metabolism, Diet, and Health by Hunt Bobo, MD. Think about it. What is a vitamin? The vitamin is a messy word created in the 20th century, referring to small organic molecules that required in the diet to maintain health, and were analyzed with the modern chemistry of the 20th century to show their molecular structure. This is as opposed to the macronutrients of carbohydrates and fats that supply and proteins that supplied the energy and building blocks for the body, but were actually not specific and could be interchanged more readily. However, this is a messy word, and it's actually been split out into multiple different vitamins, vitamers, for a vitamin. Like vitamin A could be retinol or beta-carotene. They would basically serve the same purpose. And they split vitamin B up into many, many different numbers, and they've added and subtracted vitamins that were thought to be essential and non-essential. In short, there's not really a black and white vitamin. There's some that are absolutely black, but then there's a grayscale all the way down to something that you absolutely don't need, to eventually leading over to negative effects like poisons, ethanol being slightly on the poisonous side. The first vitamin we'll start off with that was the first one named and discovered was vitamin A. Retinol. It's the beta-carotene's the yellow pigment in carrots and many other things, and they call these vitamins. There's half a dozen different organic compounds that can pass off as retinol. And you can see it's this ring structure here with multiple double bonds on the carbon, the fatty acid side chain. It's interesting that there can be toxic levels of retinol in the liver of polar bears. Carnivores seem to have a lot of vitamin A in their liver, and seem to, certainly the polar bears, can kill a person with malignant cerebral edema. The first Arctic explorers eat the liver, and they die a day or two later with a coma and delirium coma, and then a horrible agonizing headache and death with malignant intracranial hypertension. So not all vitamins are safe in excess, but a polar bear would have like 10,000 times the amount of vitamin A in its liver than a human being would need to eat. If they ate a pound of liver, it'd just make their brain swell up and die. It was first isolated and described in 1912, and that began the beginnings of our current vitamin revolution. And as we say right now, there are about 13 small organic compounds considered to be vitamins that are needed in small quantities just to maintain health. And they all became defined by having illness associated with lack of the vitamins in the diet. This idea of essential nutrients is not new to the 20th century and not new to the vitamins. It's been around since prehistory. The problem of scurvy or scorbutic dates back in recorded form to Hippocrates and the ancient Greeks. It was such a problem that it constituted 80% or 90% mortality for Vasco da Gama and Ferdinand Magellan in their discoveries of the route to India to the east and the sail around the world. And Cook got awarded a medal for the British Admiralty to prevent scurvy and not losing a single sailor to scurvy. By that time, the Germans had figured out sauerkraut prevented scurvy, and The English were figuring out that citrus fruits prevented scurvy, and all the well-schooled mariners knew you had to stop every few weeks to get fresh vegetables to keep the crew healthy. This has been known for millennia, and it's not a new idea. It wasn't until the 20th century, with the advent of modern chemistry, that we were able to show what the vitamin A looked like. And the beta-carotene is basically two vitamin A's hooked up end to end. I even took that for a while. It made my eyelashes itch and kind of fall out, and turned over my hair follicles and skin a little faster. But boy, I was resistant to sunburn like never before in my life. Being a red-headed, fair-skinned person, I would just fry until my skin bled if I didn't stay covered one way or another. But with the beta-carotene, it seemed that I developed some resistance to sunburn. And this beta-carotene has now been kind of limited on the market because in high doses it's been shown to cause cancer. And I was taking it to prevent cancer. Who knows? You got to be willing to change your plan based on new information. Have a balanced, wide-based diet. Here's the carotenoids and the vitamins, eggs, butter, chicken liver, cod liver oil, sweet potato. Anything that's orange or yellow generally will have it. Now, there are some, like bell peppers, that it's more lycopenes and anthracyclines that really are not the carotenoids. But carrots and sweet potatoes, that's the beta-carotene and vitamin A. So that's good. The next is crazy to introduce the idea of the etymology of vitamin B. B's got over 12 different versions, and they've added and subtracted and deemed them vitamins and rejected them as vitamins. And there are things that were quackish medicines back in the 70s. Laetrile, people would go to Mexico and get Laetrile treatment for cancer that were actually vitamin B27. I never heard of that until I studied for this. But the B vitamins are your biggest group, and they start off with the B1. The numbering and the naming of these vitamins is totally irrational, and it's just historical. So bear with me. In medical school, we learned that there were two different forms of beriberi, and actually we've divided up into four different forms of beriberi now. Medical school, we didn't consider Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome with the alcoholics in New Orleans. And New Orleans is a very good place to study the bad effects of alcohol. A lot of drinkers down there that probably don't eat well. And we learned a lot about it, but we didn't consider it a beriberi. It was something you had to give 100 milligrams of thiamine, and it was very important to give you thiamine before you gave the glucose, because you have a damaged metabolic system and you can't metabolize anything. You take these malnourished people and start giving them glucose IV, and you stress the metabolism beyond what the thiamine capacity starts. And we were always trained, give 100 milligrams of thiamine IV first, and then you can start your IV D5W or whatever you're feeding. Otherwise, you throw them into a Wernicke-Korsakoff's and burn their PAPE circuit out in their brain, and mammillothalamic tracts and mammillary bodies in their midbrain. So thiamine deficiency, the dry beriberi was a neuropathy and was chronic and long, slow term, I think, and I may have it backwards, but the wet beriberi was cardiovascular primarily, with leg swelling and congestive heart failure-like symptoms. But it's vitamin B1, and forever we only knew about the thiamine, but just in the last few months, I've found people saying that actually with this neuropathy and long-term neuropathic changes and problems, you actually need to have a different form of B12, of B1, of thiamine. You need to have benfotiamine, which is more lipid soluble and crosses into the cells better. So they listed now the 4 forms of beriberi or Wernicke-Korsakoff's, like we talked about in New Orleans. We had plenty of experience. Just use that as a different name, a different disease, but it's still a thiamine deficiency. And wet and dry beriberi. And now we have a new one that I had never heard of before, and that is gastrointestinal beriberi, characterized by nausea, vomiting, lactic acidosis, and infantile beriberi we knew about. So the benfotiamine is a thiamine derivative, and this is the thiamine going to a full ring structure, and it's actually more soluble. I'm going to look up treatment, epidemiology, benfotiamine, etymology, poultry. It's interesting. They found this in the monks' chickens in China, where the monks' chickens got polished rice, and the peasant farmers' chickens got unpolished rice, and the fancy, well-fed, highfalutin monks' chickens developed this opisthoconus, and the head went back, and they had the beriberi symptoms. In the peasant rice, the chickens didn't get it. But I'll look up benfotiamine. Which is a form of thiamine. It's a synthetic fat-soluble S-acyl derivative of thiamine, vitamin B1. This is the picture up here, and it's ring structure, and it's much more soluble in lipids and can get into the nerves better. All these vitamins are basically cofactors or intermediates that we can't manufacture ourselves, and they represent a genetic defect that we have, where we've lost the ability to manufacture, say, vitamin C. We literally have the DNA to manufacture gulonolactone synthase, and this is our tool that we use for this. This is vitamin C right here in the middle. Let that settle down. It's very similar to glucose. Vitamin C is C6H8O6, and the vitamin C works most often just as a shuttle between the dehydroascorbate and the ascorbate. That's the name of it. Scorbies is the old name for scurvy, and ascorbate is lack of scurvy. So it just shuttles back and forth between the dehydroascorbate and the ascorbate, trading off a proton with glutathione and oxide glutathione. The glutathione is another reducing agent, and it just continually cycles back and forth. We can make glutathione, but we can't make vitamin C. We have to have that. Have to import that product, like having to import ball bearings or O-rings if you can't make them. And the enzyme we're lacking is gulonolactone oxidase right here. The gulonolactone oxidase is present in the DNA sequence, but has multiple different defects that prevent it from working right. Once we lost a functional gulonolactone oxidase and we required vitamin C to live and breed, it did not matter how many further defects we got in that enzyme DNA sequence. So there was no filter killing any people with mutations in that enzyme because we were all deficient in it. So once you have an enzyme that doesn't work, then you can kind of time when the original defect occurred by how many defects have developed since then, because it doesn't matter if it quits working. It doesn't matter how many holes you get in a car out in the front driveway that's not working. You're not using it anyway. But if you have something that's not working and keeps you from reproducing and passing your genes on in the next generation, you have to keep it functional. But the same's true for every vitamin that we have and every vitamin that we use. We don't have the ability to make it, so it is in essence a genetic defect. There is some other animal that can make it. The goat is a champion at making vitamin C. Dogs and cats can make enough and just barely get by and stuff, but a guinea pig is just like a human and requires vitamin C or else it gets sick. Rats, they make more than dogs and cats and they get by better, but they're not as champion at it as goats are. So the vitamin C was one of the big killers in the recent Middle Ages and Dark Ages, especially on voyages where you were living off of bread and salted meat. But it's heat labile. When you cook, especially in a copper vessel, it is destroyed. But the animals that we'd eat can make it, and we can get it from them. Usually ascorbate is from the citrus fruits and cabbage and fresh greens. We get plenty of that. But there is enough left over in meat that we can get ascorbate from our meat that we would eat from animals, especially if in the case of the Inuit and Eskimos who don't eat much in the way of greens or never citrus fruit, they typically would eat fresh frozen fish that's not cooked, so they have the advantage of not destroying the vitamin C with the heat. So the actual Inuit intake is close to the RDA of vitamin C as required. We know about vitamin A, the vitamin B. We've got thiamine deficiency with the B1. And we have benfotiamine, which is a much more lipid-soluble form and evidently is better for treating neuropathies and works well. And we've got B2. Let's see. Vitamin B2. Wikipedia. Niacin is B3. Pellagra. Vitamin B2. I think it's biotin. Riboflavin, the yellow one. Riboflavin. See, it's a ring structure here. All these things came about to be named because of a deficiency in a disease that was caused by this. And they basically are metabolic intermediates and cofactors in our metabolism. And there's a very good tool that I use sometimes. This one we've seen before. It's called Metabolic Pathways by Hoffman LaRoche, or Roche Biochemical Pathways. It's a wonderful service that they've provided using this. Basically, it's like an interactive atlas written out. Let's see, part 1. That's B12. Riboflavin. Ribose is a 5-carbon sugar. Yeah. Here's riboflavin. Ribose, 5-carbon sugar, and riboflavin is a yellow ligament. This is a planar tricyclic hydrocarbon. I was trying to find it in the Roche Biochemical Pathways, but it wasn't showing up. It's a water-soluble vitamin. You pee it right out. It makes your pee yellow. Definition, the function. It's a two major coenzymes, FAD and FMN, in energy metabolism. It goes along with vitamin B6, the pyridoxal phosphate, 5-phosphate. Basically, all these things work as cofactors, like little tool and dies in a factory making things with the enzymes, which lower the energy of activation of a chemical process, and coupled with the addition of an energy molecule such as ATP or ADP. An enzyme involved in folate metabolism, 5,10-methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase, requires FAD to form the amino acid methionine from homocysteine. And so riboflavin is a metabolic intermediate we can't make. And that's B2. We saw that B3 was the niacin, which is so common and causes pellagra when we don't have it. It's inflamed skin, diarrhea, and dementia. All these things start to run together. You know, there's subtle differences between the skin lesions of scurvy with swollen joints and torn ligaments and hemorrhagic papules with scurvy and vitamin C. And then these dermatitis, dementia, diarrhea with the pellagra. But they look a little different, even though they cause some similar problems. And again, niacin is not the only substance that would prevent this from happening. You know, things like nicotine mononucleotide, nicotine adenine mononucleotide, or maybe even tryptophan can help ameliorate some of these symptoms. And of course, everything occurs long-term alcoholism where you don't get proper nutrition and then you burn up more of your agents that you can't manufacture. And here's the nicotinamide. Treatment is either with niacin or nicotinamide supplementation. And NMN is one that's popular now, just recently kind of taken off the over-the-counter market. And sunlight sensitivity, everything causes hair swelling, inflammation, and dermatitis. And you treat it with good nutrition. And frequently these people would have probably multiple vitamin deficiencies. And all these things went all the way up through vitamin C. D is a sterol, and it is used in calcium divalent cation metabolism. Keeps the calcium in your bones and out of your kidneys. Turns out for 40 years I'd prescribed calcium to try to make people's bones harder and vitamin D and check vitamin D levels. Didn't seem to work because we were missing a vitamin I'd never heard of before, vitamin K2, aquamaphytin. But vitamin D is important. If you have no kidneys and you're on dialysis, you need Rocaltrol, not just vitamin D3. You need like vitamin D5. But if you don't have vitamin D, you get rickets. It's typically a disease of babies in bow legs and soft bones and wrist dislocations. Everything is amplified by pregnancy and growth in children because they're changing and require so much better nutrition than an adult that can weather semi-starvation much better. Interestingly enough, this actually is made from cholesterol in a healthy individual. Just cholesterol and sunlight will convert the cholesterol like vitamin D1, and your body can go on and make vitamin D3, 4, and 5 out of it. You can do well. But rickets was a serious problem back 300 years ago. It was known all the way back in ancient Egypt and the ancient Greece. Vitamin E is a more recent discovery with women having miscarriages. The word tocopherol derives from toco, which means pregnant, and is a miracle vitamin to keep pregnant women from aborting. You can't actually prevent abortion or death or problems by just one agent. There is no magic bullet. The key is a balance and to have all of the necessary agents available. But this vitamin E, that's this ring structure with this fatty acid on the side, notice how similar everything looks. The vitamin C looks like glucose, and the vitamin E and beta carotene both have a ring and a fatty acid on the side, but they're different. They have different effects, and they're all required. It's just the ones that we can't make in adequate amounts that are needed to be supplemented. So I had a friend that was training a few years ahead of me, did trauma research, and he worked with a guy that had a model for spinal cord damage in rats, where he dropped like a 1 gram weight from 180 centimeters up, and it would hit the spinal cord where a laminectomy had been done in these rats and cause half of them to be paralyzed, not able to walk, and the other half to be partially recovered. But he had one group of rats he got from a different vendor, and none of them got paralyzed. And he said, golly, this is weird. Ran it down and found out that this vendor had been giving his rats food with vitamin E supplementation for like 3 months before they came to the researcher. And he did the experiment of it's exactly the same species of rats, getting the ones from the old vendor, giving them vitamin E, doing the test, they became resistant, getting the ones from the new vendor, taking them off of that food and giving them the vitamin E deficient food for like 3 months, and they became paralyzed. That was enough to convince me to start taking up to 1,600 units of vitamin E a day, or 4 capsules of 400 milligrams each. And that's how I got on the vitamin E. The word vitamin F was originally used for the 2 essential fatty acids that we have. And the fatty acids are labeled according to where the double bonds chart. And they changed it. Somehow they decided that fatty acid wasn't worthy of the name vitamin, so they changed it to essential fatty acid. Linoleic acid is an omega-6, which means the first double bond starts from the sixth carbon from the end. And let's see here. This is 18 carbon. And there's the W. The funny looking W is an omega, and that's 18. So there's 1, 2, 3. That's an omega-3. Starts right there at the third carbon between 15 and 16. This is 18, 17, 16. The omega-6 would be one that started right here at the sixth carbon. And those two are required because we can't make them. But actually, like I said, there's not a black and white or grayscale. So the omega-3 is the alpha-linolenic acid here. The omega-6, that's linoleic acid. The omega-6 is linoleic acid. One less N, La. We'll call that La for short. It's omega-6. ALA, alpha-linolenic acid, is the omega-3. Turns out that omega-6 fatty acids are actually the precursors for your inflammatory arachidonic acid pathway that the aspirin blocks. We're supposed to be able to make the EPA and DHA well enough, and gamma-linolenic and linoleic acid, but we don't. We actually would do better if we were supplemented with this. And if we kept this ratio of these inflammatory omega-6 fatty acids to the less or non-inflammatory omega-3 fatty acids, more like 3 or 4 to 1 at most instead of 20 to 1. The arachidonic acid listed down here is the one that goes down into the inflammatory prostaglandins. So the linolenic acid, which is the omega-3, or is from your better ratio in your olive oil and avocado oil. The omega-6 is higher in your seed oils like rapeseed oil, which is canola oil, or which is probably the best of all of them. Soybean oil and corn oil are particularly bad ones. So stay away from the regular frying oils and use avocado oil. If you're going to fry, do not fry under high heat the olive oil, because it breaks down into trans fats that you can't metabolize and make you sick. Essential diet. So I think that we need to consider this as a gray area, that you may be able to get by with ALA and LA in an equal ratio would be ideal, or certainly not more than 3 to 1 or so of the LA to ALA, not 20 to 1 of LA to ALA like we have in our corn oil popcorn. And the DHA usually comes from a marine source from way up north where it's cold. So you want the DHA and ALA and minimize the omega-6s, but you still have to have some. I think we're not going to completely miss out on the LA and become deficient in that. And that's the fatty acids, FG. There was, you look these up, there's listed things for all these, like G circles back around to be biotin or some other agent. And H, I, you look up I and it says ibuprofen. J, K is the actual next current vitamin that works. They're very similar, but the K1 works on the clotting factors in the liver. K2 actually is the missing link throughout my entire medical career of putting the calcium into the bones and taking it out of the arteries. The vitamin D and the calcium and these little old ladies on Coumadin never worked. And it helped maybe a little bit, but not much, even with the hormone Forteo substituted. The K2, something I learned about less than a year ago, is actually the same thing as K1 with a different side chain, a longer side chain. Here's a picture of vitamin K1 that makes the clotting factors in the liver. Primary source of this is leafy green vegetables. K2 is more from animal sources like pork and meat and stuff. But your biggest source of K2 is fermented soybeans called natto. And it really doesn't do as much for the clotting factors. I saw all these little old ladies on Coumadin become calcified in the aorta and very osteopenic in the spine. And I kept throwing calcium at it and vitamin D and and magnesium, knew it was a maldistribution, and Forteo and all the bisphosphonates, which are another can of worms that didn't work right. But the K2, right now, I'm hoping that's going to be the missing ingredient. And the K2 has a longer side chain. This up here, the K1, has got a 3 repeat, and this has got 3 plus 1, a longer side chain of this fatty acid on the. You see the double ring surface here, double ring here, and then there's a K7 and stuff. They work like the K2, so I've been taking K2 to try to keep the calcium out of my arteries and in my bones. And the main thing, though, is that all these things were named when deficiencies were found, but there's a minimum level to live adequately and not have overt sickness and die young and early. However, there are people that make a huge case for having a massive dose of like vitamin C or vitamin D and make remarkable claims for how it fights off infection or cures viruses from AIDS to hepatitis to yellow fever or even malaria. But it's a very complex situation, and you can't actually make sweeping statements like that without knowing the details. We'll get into the specifics of other deficiencies later. I do have many interesting anecdotes about small 3-month-old Choctaw baby I had with hydrocephalus and a thrombosed sagittal sinus and flame hemorrhages all throughout the brain. Very scary looking. We were called to treat the hydrocephalus, and we did. And the pediatric biochemist, geneticist was consulted and started this baby on betaine, Betain, a substance I'd never heard of before, even though I was a biochemistry major. I did know about homocystinuria, and I think that's what the child had, was heterozygous or homozygous recessive deficiency in the enzyme that metabolized the homocysteine and built up a lethal level of homocysteine at age 3 months, caused thrombosis. And that baby that I thought might die and was scary looking, that we put the shunt into and let the fontanelles collapse down and the sutures override, this big tight head relaxed and started following the normal curve for head circumference, and then developing neurologically, very irritable and wouldn't eat. And I was worried the child was going to die, and especially when you thrombose all the veins in your head. Within 2 weeks, all the thrombosis had cleared, and the homocysteine level had come back down to normal, and the child had no further clots. Did well with the shunt that we put in, and I got to see the kid and follow up for the shunt, and actually did very well from a hematologic, neurologic standpoint, just with the betaine. I think they also had him on like a low methionine diet, so they wouldn't be developing a bunch of homocysteine, and did other biochemical things. But to me, that represented the criteria that we've been using for a vitamin. This child would basically be considered as having betaine, which is trimethylglycine, as a vitamin. And betain. So to this child, betaine is a vitamin. So I take about 4 grams of trimethylglycine per day in the last couple of years. There's like other vitamirs, there's a whole group of betaines, but the quintessential one is trimethylglycine. This is a betaine that I'm not so familiar with. We'll look at trimethylglycine. Very simple. This is glycine, which is a carboxylic acid group on the right. The alpha carbon, which is glycine, the simplest amino acid that's essential in our biology you can get. With the first carbon has a amine group on it. But instead of having 3 hydrogens on the left, it's got 3 methyl groups. This one simple molecule, trimethylglycine, seemed to have cured this baby. So in other words, your vitamins aren't necessarily the same as my vitamins, and my DNA is different than your DNA, or else we're twins, okay? So you can eat things I can't eat, and conversely, I probably can eat things you can't eat. Follow along with me when we investigate each one of these individual things and use that chart. Thank you very much. Bye until next time. We'll see you and talk about vitamin A.